You have.
Action.
Welcome to Good Grief. We're so glad that you have joined us today for this presentation. This seminar, we're coming to you from the Dallas, Texas area. And of course, the border has been closed between the United States and Canada, and so we can't get to you. That's how we would prefer to do this, but even then, meeting in large groups is not a good idea under these circumstances. So we're coming to you virtually. And we hope that this seminar will be of some value to you.
So his name is Mike Tucker, and he is a Texan.
Yeah, I am guilty as charged.
And my name is Pam Tucker. I am a Canadian, and the Willowdale Seventh-day Adventist Church, which is hosting this Good Grief Tears to Joy seminar, is my home church. And that's where I grew up. I went to kindergarten and Sabbath schools and early teens and
all sorts of
fun things. So I know that it's an awesome place, and I'm really glad that we're able to be with them, at least virtually, in order to be able to present Good Grief.
Yeah. Now, we have to assume that because you're watching this seminar and you're participating with it, you've had a loss, or you know someone who's had a loss, and you want to help them. And so just understand that you're not alone in that. Loss is a reality of life. We've all gone through them. I have, Pam has. What we're going to present to you today is primarily the science that is associated with recovery from loss. There's a lot of good research out there, and we want to share with you some of the information. The keys to making a good adjustment to loss is understanding it. Understanding what's going on, understanding the science. And so we're going to be dealing with that today. You also have some handouts, I believe, that have been made available to you. And so you might use these in order to take notes as we move along. The handouts are available for you. And if you're not a note taker, don't worry about it. If you just want to listen, that's fine too. You do what's going to be helpful for you. But the first session is entitled, What Grief Is. And so here we come with a kind of a definition. Grief is an experience reserved for those who love.
And, well, that's really what it's saying. Grief is an experience reserved for those who love. Those who do not love do not grieve. We grieve greatly because we have loved greatly. You only grieve when you have lost and experienced great love.
That's right.
And so it is an okay thing to be able to experience that.
Well, we want you to understand that although we come to you with the science, I have a degree in counseling. I've worked I've done seminars like this on grief for well over 30 years. I am a counselor. I've been a chaplain in hospice, hospital settings, and psychiatric hospitals. I've done these types of presentations for corporations. This has been a long study of mine. However, about 4 years ago, a little over 4 years ago, I had a very significant loss of my own. And my wife, Gail, to whom I was married for over 40 years, and we created other seminars together. We created one entitled Man About Marriage that we presented all over the world for about 121 times. Mm-hmm. And we did television together as well. She died April 10 of 2016, and there you see her photo. That is my most recent significant loss. I've had others as well, friends since then, that have been of some significance, but nothing quite like losing a spouse of 40 years. Mm-hmm. And of course, Pam, you've had a loss as well.
And just last September, I lost my father. And although I've lost family members, grandparents, and have lost friends that were very dear, the anticipatory grief upcoming to my father's passing was an entirely mind-boggling experience. And you only have one daddy. And
That's true.
Being a daddy's girl and then losing your daddy is
a tough thing.
It's what I'm trying to adjust to.
The truth is that there are no easy losses.
No.
There are differences and nuances of difference in loss. And you can't say that your loss is any more or any less than mine, or mine any more or less than yours, because we deal with loss differently. Every person is different. Every relationship is different. Everyone's history is different. Your personality, your coping skills are different. So what some may not think is a great loss for you is a huge loss. So don't let anybody minimize your pain or compare your pain to someone else's. Pain is pain.
Grief is personal. Grief is personal. And I know that there's a lot of people viewing this that may have known my dad because Willowdale Church was our home church.
That's right.
And they're experiencing grief. His friends experiencing grief. My mom experiences grief, and everyone's grief journey looks a little bit different.
We just got an email from the organizers of this particular seminar there at Willowdale about a couple who lost a child to death, an infant.
Yes.
I work with people who have gone through these losses. That's a very significant, impactful loss, especially for marriages. The research shows that the divorce rate on couples who lose a child is very high, and so we just need to be intentional about recovering from such losses. Let's talk a little bit about what grief really is. And here we've got a slide that tells us, gives us a definition. This comes from no less a resource than Wikipedia, but actually the definition is a good one. Grief is a multifaceted response to loss, particularly to the loss of someone or something that has died, to which a bond or affection was formed. Although conventionally focused on the emotional response to loss, it also has physical, cognitive, behavioral, social, cultural, and spiritual and philosophical dimensions as well. So this affects every part of your being, your body, your mind, your psyche, your identity. Grief is all-encompassing. Everyone experiences it. You can't escape it. You're going to go through some experience of loss if you haven't already. And by the way, if you're like over 12, you've had a loss of some nature. You had a loss, and it may be a divorce. It may be the loss of a pet, or a dream, or a hope, or expectation. Losses of body parts, amputation, mastectomies, a loss of health and mobility. All of these are losses as well as person loss. This is a good definition for all of it, but it involves every part of your being. Now, there's some normal reactions that we'll have to grief.
If you just look here, why do I feel out of control? I'm so glad it's over.
And by the way, that I'm so glad it's over usually happens after protracted illness.
Right.
If there's been a yo-yo effect, they're about to die, they rally, they're about to die. It's a long-term loss. That's usually when that occurs.
And that also then follows with guilt or
Guilt,
being relieved.
Yeah.
I never knew it would hurt so bad. I feel as if it isn't real. I feel a tightness in my throat and a heaviness in my chest. My mood changes over the slightest things. What is there left for me to live for? I'm easily irritated. That one I know.
Well, we all get there.
And sometimes I feel angry.
Yeah, that's
I
right.
know that one too.
Yeah. And the list goes on. You cry at unexpected times. You don't want others to see you when you feel sad. You can't concentrate. Right now, I can't remember if you're supposed to be talking about the slide or me because we're both grieving. And
That's all right.
And so again, those are all normal symptoms of a loss.
I immediately after Dad passed away and I came back from Toronto, I remember standing in the kitchen trying to write a grocery list.
Yeah.
And I could not for the life of me remember my favorite brand of coffee.
Yeah.
And I stood there and I just stared. And then I realized I don't even remember my neighbor's name.
Yeah.
How do I not know my neighbor's name?
Yeah.
And although that may make you feel crazy, it's perfectly normal.
In fact, that is one of the things that I hear most often from people who are grieving intensely. I feel like I've lost my mind.
Yes.
Well, the truth is you haven't. You have suffered a brain injury because that's basically what loss is. And we go on with the list here. I can't concentrate. I sense my loved one's presence, like hearing their voice. I feel like my mind is on a merry-go-round that will not stop. I have trouble sleeping. Somatic disturbances is what we refer to this as.
Yes.
Some people sleep all the time and others can't sleep at all, or you sleep fitfully for a few hours, you wake up restless, can't go back to sleep, even though you're still sleeping. I don't feel hungry, or I feel hungry all the time. Some people eat their way through grief and others try to starve their way through grief.
Right.
I'm more of a comfort eater. I tend to eat my way through grief.
I starve. I'm just not hungry.
So I miss being touched. That's a big one. And I miss having someone to help me make decisions, especially if this was a life partner. Here are some of the initial symptoms of grief. And those are things like shock, denial, anger, detachment, or withdrawal, the inability to think, confusion, or guilt. And by the way, you may not have all of these symptoms. You may have some of them and not others, and that's okay.
And not necessarily in order.
No, not necessarily in any order.
Not in order.
And you may go back and forth between symptoms or have them simultaneously. This is just kind of a list of some of the things that happen usually initially, right? And then long term, maybe over the next 6 months to 2 years, there are more delayed responses to grief, but these will still come in. Loneliness, sadness, emptiness, searching. And by the way, the searching can be either searching for the deceased, searching for meaning, searching for direction, focus, searching for something you're not sure what. Fear is another big one, especially if you fear another loss, you fear your own, if you get a cold, you're sure it's pneumonia. If someone coughs, you're sure it's COVID. You're worried about your neighbors, you're worried about your family. And fear of another loss is just overwhelming. Your own loss. Weeping it can be big. I've had people say, I wish I could cry. As long as you give yourself permission to cry, that's not something to worry about. If you know crying's okay, that's okay.
When my grandfather passed away, my grandmother didn't cry. And people got upset with her for not crying. And they said, well, why aren't you you're upset with the fact that you know he's not here anymore. And it was not for 6 months before she finally was able to let down and have that week. But it can't be on anyone else's schedule.
No, it's on your schedule. There is no timetable. And when we say this is 6 months to 2 years, you may experience these earlier than that. You may experience them longer than that. That's not the issue here. This is just generally speaking. Sighing, fatigue, chest pain, jealousy. Jealousy is an interesting thing. And maybe jealous over those who haven't had a similar loss, or jealous over those who are getting better sooner than you are, or at least seem to be. Jealous over, I remember after Gail died, we had planned at some point to take our grandchildren to Disneyland or Disney World, one or the other, we didn't care which. And we were going to do that as a couple, take the 2 grandkids with us. And I remember sitting, I had a speaking engagement in Orlando, and I was sitting in a restaurant, and I looked over, and there were a pair of grandparents, husband and wife, with their grandchildren, obviously having just come from Disneyland, and I was jealous. Because that was supposed to be our trip, and now I knew I would not take that trip with Gail and with my grandchildren. Sighing, fatigue, chest pain, jealousy, memory loss, inability to concentrate. And those 2 are some of the most vexing. Short-term memory loss in particular. I had a friend who was doing something in a room, needed something in the next room, got up, went to the next room, could not remember what they came for, and so they started to turn around and go back and complete what they were doing, could not remember where they'd been or what they'd been doing. So I've lost my mind, you know. So they could not concentrate. The short-term memory loss was huge for them.
During my father's illness, I was able to meet a wonderful author named David Kessler. He is a renowned expert, really, on grief and loss. And his book, The Needs of the Dying, he actually recommended it for me. And I know that in itself was a blessing for me as my father's journey was coming to an end. Mike, as a host for Lifestyle Magazine, has had an opportunity to interview a number of experts, and David Kessler has been a repeat guest a number of times. And this is just going to be a brief snippet from that interview, one of the interviews with David Kessler.
So take a look at this right now. Here with David Kessler, probably the world's foremost authority. I'm here with David Kessler, probably the world's foremost authority on things related to grief and loss. I'm wondering, David, if you could just give us a few tips for someone who's in this process of grieving. What should they do?
Well, I think if someone has found themselves dealing with a loss, the most important thing to do
I'm here with David Kessler, probably the world's foremost authority on things related to grief and loss. I'm wondering, David, if you could just give us a few tips for someone who's in this process of grieving. What should they do?
Well, I think if someone has found themselves dealing with a loss, the most important thing to do is to just feel what you're feeling. It sounds so simple, but sometimes in grief, we want to avoid it or go around the pain, and you can't.
No.
You have to go through it. And that pain is a reflection of the love. To just allow that to happen.
I've said we grieve greatly because we have loved greatly. It's the price we pay for love.
Correct.
But it's a price well worth paying, because life without love is no good, is it?
No, and a lot of people don't realize that's a package deal
Yeah.
in this life.
It is.
And one of the things that I'll often ask people is, I see how bad your pain is. But if we could go back and have you never have that husband, that wife, that son, that parent, and you could just skip the pain, but you'd also skip knowing them this lifetime. Would you want to do that? And of course the answer is like, no.
Never.
No, I'll take the love and the pain.
Yeah.
Just have been with them.
That's right.
All right, we're having a technical difficulty because we can't tell when the video starts and stops on your end. So we're trying to work that out as we move on. But here, I want to continue with information from Kubler-Ross, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. David Kessler, who we just saw in the interview, was the protege of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. And so she has her 5 stages of dying or grief. And Kessler has added a 6th stage, which we'll talk about at a later time. Now, these 5 stages, I want you to understand, they've been greatly misunderstood and I believe misused. These were not meant to be sequential, and not everyone will have all of these stages. You may not have, I didn't have denial or anger or bargaining with my loss with Gail. None of those 3 were my experience. And so you may not have any of them, and they may come in a different order for you. But here they are: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. And then finally, Kessler has added a 6th stage for grief, and that is finding meaning. Now, there's value in these because you can identify for yourself where you might be, and if you're going through one of those things, you realize that this is normal. It's all right for you to be where you are. But if you're not going through those things, that doesn't mean that you're abnormal. You may come at a different pace and a different order, and you may not have some of these things, and that's quite all right as well. Here's the timeline. The average, are you going to do this one or am I doing that? I'm doing that, okay. The average time for active grief is normally from 10 months to 2 years. However, you can grieve actively for up to about 5 years without being pathological with your grief. This is your grief. Don't allow anyone to force a timeline on you. Be gentle with yourself. Your experience will be different from anyone else's experience. So don't let them push anything on you. This is your grief, and this is okay. But that's the general timeline for most people.
Love stories. The opportunity for you as you're navigating through grief is to tell those stories. And sometimes in the telling of the stories, you're writing them down, you're repeating them, you're telling friends, and it's okay. Just keep reading, writing, repeating, and telling those love stories is really another way that you can honor the memory of the person that you lost.
And that's true for negative stories as well as the positive stories. It's all a part of the relationship, because no relationship is all sweetness and essential to your recovery and to your healing and your moving forward, telling the stories, writing and whatever else.
Now, we're going to go back to this over and over throughout the rest of the seminar. But again, this is another opportunity where Mike got to ask David just about what the importance of love stories is, telling your story.
Here's that video.
Telling stories, good or bad?
Telling stories are great.
Yeah.
Telling stories, share a story of some way that person's touched your life too. It helps us when we're in grief expand our memory of that person.
Okay.
So we think it's important to tell your story because in order to tell the story, you have to remember. And remembering is a sacred act. The more often you tell the story, the more often you remember. Remembering is a sacred act. And as we remember, in one sense, that person continues to live on inside of our heart and our mind. Their influence, their impact lives on because we've told the story, we've remembered.
Especially important with children.
Yes.
Because children don't have the same length of time of the experience that an adult has. And so the stories that we know, we will have to be the storyteller to make sure that that goes from generation to generation so that that person is not forgotten.
That can also be a part of the healing experience for children too, to hear the stories and to tell their own stories, positive and negative, because they have fewer resources with which to deal with loss. But if they see the adults crying and telling the stories, that's healthy for them, that's okay. So remembering is a sacred act.
Now, some of the activities are making a list of your current symptoms. Now, you may refer to the list that was provided in your handout, or you may have some symptoms that haven't been listed there. So make a new list every week. You may find that some symptoms appear and disappear and then reappear again from week to week.
That's right. Write the story of your relationship. And we're going to give you just a moment to at least start that process if you'd like to, as we make the transition from this presentation to the next. But just to kind of jot down maybe a brief outline, or maybe if you could write down kind of a title for the story that you want to write. But write the story of your relationship with the person you lost. Write the good, the bad, the positive, the painful. Share what you miss, what you enjoy remembering, and the things that made you happy and sad. Write about your emotions, the challenges you're facing, the successes and failures in your life. Chronicle your daily life. Write a little bit every day, and be completely honest when you write. And because if you're trying to flower this up and make it better than it was, it's not helpful for you. It's not helpful for anybody else. Tell the truth, but tell the stories and tell them over and over again. Take just a moment. You've got your notes there. Kind of jot down what it is you want to write. We're not going to give you enough time to write today because obviously we need to move on with the presentation. But perhaps you can make enough self notes here to know where it is you want to go with this and how you want to write so that you can do this activity after our presentation is over. Take a moment to do that right now. All right, I told you it wouldn't be long, didn't I? And it wasn't.
I'm not sure if they're back yet.
Yeah.
They may not be back yet.
And
Well,
that's
we're just
fine
gonna
too.
keep going ahead.
That's fine too. But I just wanted you to look at the place in your notes where you can do this. And again, in the context of this presentation, there's not enough time for you to do everything. That's why as we near the end of the presentation, of today's presentations, we're going to make a suggestion for you. In fact, we've made a provision for you to continue with your studies and with your support in this area. I'll get to that more in just a little bit, but I want you to know that we have created a small group curriculum, a resource that's available, and we're going to actually make that available to you in just a little bit. But we'll talk about that more as we go on for you to be able to continue your journey and take the time you really need. But right now, we want to talk about adjusting to our losses, if we could, please. We're going to start that off with a video.
Yeah, to open our session, this is a continuation of the interview with David Kessler on Lifestyle Magazine.
Take a look at this.
If indeed someone is watching this and they're helping someone grieve or watching someone, what should they do?
Well, I think one of the first things is not try to fix them.
Yes.
They're not broken. That's what grief looks like.
Right.
So don't try to show them the positive side. Isn't it great she lived a long life? I always say any sentence that begins with at least
Yeah.
is going to minimize their feelings. At least, you know, you
Yeah.
can have kids again. At
Yeah.
least to just be with them.
Right.
And I see your pain, and just know you're not alone.
About the stages of dying. Again, those are the things, we're reviewing what we did the first session. This is Kubler-Ross. Denial, that's where you just don't admit that it's happened. You kind of ignore it, you stuff it, you act as though they're still alive or they're not going to die. Anger, you can be angry with the disease, angry with the person who dies, anger with God, anger with the physicians, or if this is a murder or some other kind of death. There's a lot of places to direct this anger.
And there's a number of family members involved in the dynamics
That's
of it
right.
as well.
So it can be anger with your family, or just angry in general and you're not sure why. Bargaining, this is where you basically say, you know, take me, not my loved one.
Right.
Or if you'll do this, then it involves a prayer life almost, or just kind of thinking, if I can just do this, maybe. That's a form of bargaining. Depression, that's normal. And, there are a number of causes for clinical depression, one of which is loss. And it's actually is grief. And the symptoms of grief and depression are almost interchangeable. It's difficult to tell one from the other. But it certainly brings on depression and depressed feelings and moods. And then acceptance, this is where you say, all right, I can't avoid this. This is my reality. I accept it. And I'm going to grieve through it. And then eventually we find meaning in our lives again as we move forward. So that's one way of looking at it. I want to share another model for this that has been helpful for me. When I lost Gail, this was really helpful for me, and I've shared this model with a great many people. And I don't want to diss what Kubler-Ross has done. I mean, she's kind of the godmother of grief studies in the world. She's made everyone in the world think about death and grief differently. So kudos. But here's another model that was important for me. There are goals. Grief is a vehicle which takes you from point A to point B. Point A is the point of loss, and that's where you just feel like your life has fallen apart, you're completely disorganized. Point B, we're going to call joy, where we can re-engage in life and feel like life has meaning and purpose again. And there are certain goals that we can view these as mile markers along the way. Now, that vehicle, grief, is an old beat-up Edsel, if you're old enough to remember the Edsels. And it's got 400,000 miles. It needs a ring job. The tires are bald and they go flat all the time. And you have to take the back routes in order to get wherever you're going, right? That's what grief is. But it's the only vehicle you've got. And so the goals are basically to believe that it really happened. That's number one, because you can't grieve a loss you don't believe has happened, right? You're living in denial. And you have to be willing to experience the pain. I want to talk more about that later, how we lean into that pain. But the truth is there's no way to avoid the pain. You can't out-drink it, out-medicate it, you can't outwork it, you can't stuff it, ignore it. It's going to come back and get you. Eventually the pain will get you. I knew one man who tried to outwork his pain, and he worked almost 24/7 for years. And finally a new event in his life caused him to remember the loss of his wife. And he grieved so severely he needed to be hospitalized at that point. And so it would have been better to grieve sooner rather than to put it off and try to avoid it. It got him eventually. Adjust to the familiar environments associated with the person that you've lost. And that means everything from just how do I do the house now? When Gail left, she was the cook. Now I had to figure out how do I eat, right? Cleaning the house, maybe paying the bills. There were a variety of things there. And just going back to church or going to social events and family events, how do I do this? How do I make those adjustments?
Even just socializing with people that, especially in a married couple,
Yeah.
there was teams of people.
Yeah.
And so all of a
Couples.
sudden now there's couple, and a single.
And then me. Yeah.
And yet, as much as your friends and family will want you to participate, it's such an odd spot to be in.
It takes a real adjustment because
Sure.
you feel like you're the odd person out and you don't belong anymore.
And even as a daughter grieving her dad, people are sometimes uncomfortable.
Yeah.
They want to include you, but they're not sure
Yeah.
what's going to happen if you start to be a little bit sad.
So there's another adjustment there. And then eventually, and this is the goal that a lot of people struggle with when I mention it when they're early in the grief. And so if this bothers you with this goal, don't worry about it yet. The time will come when you actually embrace this, I believe. But you have to say goodbye to the relationship, not to the person, or not to your memories, not to your love, but to the relationship that you once had with the person that can no longer exist. Now that relationship, there's a new relationship. It's in your memories and in your heart, but it's not out here. You were always able to call them, to touch them, to have the conversation, to embrace. All that's gone now. So you have to say goodbye to the old relationship, withdraw that emotional energy, and eventually reinvest that. That's where you find meaning in Kessler's model. But those are the goals. There are some activities that help you along those goals. In fact, if you find nothing else from this whole presentation but these 4 things, and you will do them faithfully, chances are you'll grieve appropriately. And I'm just going to summarize: think, talk, write, talk, and weep. So think, write, talk, weep. If you'll do those 4 things, you're going to be okay. But take a trip down memory lane. Yeah, remembering the things, the stories, the incidents, the happenings here and there. Write. I encourage you to keep a journal or a diary. Write every day if you can. If not, then periodically, but regularly write. And some people say, I don't write. I don't like to write. Well, get a handheld recorder and just tell your stories, thinking out loud. That's a good way to do it because it forces you to organize your thoughts. That's the value of this. There's something cathartic about the words flowing onto paper or through your voice to a recorder.
For anyone that's experiencing the anticipatory grief, because you're with a loved one right now who is making that journey and is not going to be with you, writing down the stories that they tell you now
that's good.
Are gems.
Yeah.
I learned things about my father. I learned things about me that by sitting and talking, and which was one of the things that David Kessler's book, The Needs of the Dying, really impresses you upon, is to be present with that person. But that is an opportunity for you to get into the habit of starting to write.
Yeah.
There's always good times.
Even when I visited with your dad, there are all sorts of things that I found out about his life and his fears about his family, his concerns. So we talk about those things. Talk. Details should be told over and over again, but you need to express feelings as well. Talk about the immediate loss, move back through your total relationship with the person, express deep feelings, even those that may be negative. So talk about, this is what I think, this is what I feel, this is what I remember, those kinds of things. And then weep. Don't hold back the tears. It's therapeutic to cry. No one's ever died from crying. If anyone could have, the amount I cried when I had this loss was so, I should be dead if you can die from crying, because the tears just flowed incessantly. And I also found that I'm an ugly crier. I happened to see myself in the mirror when I was crying. It was frightening. But you know, it's normal. It's a part of the experience. And so if you find yourself weeping, don't apologize for that. Just cry. It's okay. You're supposed to be doing this.
It's hard to think of grief as being healthy, and yet the intensity of being able to grieve very intensely and deeply early is healthier than sort of trying to ostrich your head in the sand and avoiding the reality of it. Because the rule of thumb really for grief is the sooner that you engage in intense grief, the sooner you get better. The longer you wait, the longer it takes. And by getting better doesn't mean you will never ever experience pain at the
or
thought
sorrow
or the
or
loss
tears.
or the sorrow or tears. And I would venture to say that surprise is one of the other symptoms of grief, because you will have moments that catch you completely off guard that you did not necessarily associate with your loved one, and all of a sudden you're just you're inundated with waves of grief.
The research shows, the science shows that intense early grief is a key for a healthy adjustment. In fact, those who will intentionally engage early in the process, as painful as that is, but will grieve intentionally early, rather than medicating it or avoiding it or ignoring it, those are the ones who will make the quickest adjustment to the loss. And it will certainly be a better adjustment. So the intense grief early is a very important key. That's the rule of thumb, as they mentioned. And so through this process, I developed something I call leaning into the pain. I don't know if I'm the first one to coin that or not, but that's the phrase that meant something for me. That meant that after my loss, I anticipated activities that were going to be painful for me. And I tried to do them earlier rather than later. Grief's a bully. It will surprise you and it will beat you up and knock you down when you least expect it. It sneak attacks. It will blind cold
Pull the
cock.
rug out from underneath.
Yeah, that's
There's
right.
all those analogies.
So for me, it was better to at least have the illusion of taking some measure of control. And that meant that I would anticipate that which would be difficult, and I would engage in that process early. An example for me, I do a lot of public presentations. And so I did my first major public presentation before thousands of people. It was probably within 2 months of that loss. It was almost about a month and a half of that loss. Gail and I did a seminar together. I did that seminar once again within the first 5 months. We go to various places for vacation. We love to go to New York City, take our air miles, fly up there, get a hotel with our points, and go to a Broadway show. I did it on my own. And I cried through the whole thing. We took cruises together. I took a cruise intentionally. And I did all those things within the first 4 to 6 months. And doing that, I reclaimed them for myself. I made myself hurt like crazy when I did that. But it made for a better, and I believe a faster adjustment for me by leaning into the pain instead of running from pain. Now, you may not be able to do this with everything. And so you have to be the judge of how much you can stand and how much you can lean into. And you give yourself good support and give yourself an easy out if it gets too heavy for you. But as much as is possible, anticipate what's going to be painful and try to do it early rather than later. Lean into it, don't avoid it, because as you lean into it, eventually it's going to be more healing for you. That's my experience.
My way of leaning into the pain was a week after Dad's passing. I got the email that said, "Don't forget, you're doing a concert tomorrow evening."
Yeah.
And I wasn't sure that I was going to have the ability to be able to do that. And I honestly had to just send out a 911 to all of my friends who pray and say, "I just need your prayers because I'm not sure that I can do this." And I don't remember what songs I sang.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember what I said between the songs. But you were there.
I was there, and by the way, it was cogent. It made sense. It was well done. So you survived. You did very well.
But that was one of those things where you lean into it with unexpected.
Yeah.
The timing of it was pretty spectacular.
You may find things like that you have to lean into and get support. Get people around you who will encourage you and help you through this. There's some steps to adjusting, and that is you must become accustomed to the absence of what you've lost. Adjustments means not behaving the same way you did when what you lost was a part of your world. You need to acquire a new identity, and that's a hard thing because I was married for 40 years and suddenly I was single.
Right.
And to get my mind around that was a part of the adjustment. I was a team, and now I'm by myself.
Right.
So part of it was getting a new identity for me, but also behaving differently than I did before at times. There's some things I could keep and I should keep and do the same, but other things I needed to change.
Yeah.
And so that's a part of the adjustment.
For me, I've had 56 years of being a daddy's girl.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, I'm not a daddy's girl anymore. And so when the phone doesn't ring and it's not Dad singing, I just called to say I love you.
Yeah.
I'm thinking.
That gets you teared up even just telling it here.
It does.
It does. I can see it.
I was the singer in the family, but I loved every note that came out when he sang that song.
Of course.
Yeah.
And that, again, telling that story and others like it are what's necessary for us to continue this journey. And again, people will use the word recovery. I don't know that that's an appropriate word for us. And that may slip out of our mouth from time to time, but it's not. You never really recover. You make the adjustments and you find joy again. It's different. You will always be different. You will always be changed. And that's as it should be. That's just the way it's going to be for you. But you can make a new life for yourself. You can find joy and purpose again in your life, and that's what we want. Part of that's acquiring the new identity. So the steps to adjusting is we're going to develop a new relationship with God. For me, it was always right here, right now, physical, seeing each other, working together. Now, the relationship, pardon me, and I'm not crying, I just got choked, but I could cry very easily. It is in my mind and in my heart. And so that's the new relationship. You keep the loved one alive in your memory in healthy and appropriate manner. We can talk more about the problems associated with that. And you form a new identity with the other person without that presence in your life. So a new identity for yourself. A healthy and appropriate manner, in order to understand that, we have to talk about what's unhealthy. What's unhealthy is what we call shrine building, where someone will say, all right, this was her room.
Right.
No one may enter, no one may touch it, and that goes on for months, even years.
Right.
That's unhealthy. That's not moving on. That's an unhealthy way to keep them alive in your heart and your mind. Some things should remain the same and others should change, and you have to make some healthy decisions about that and keep them alive in a healthy way.
I mean, from the shrine building part of it, my father gave me some of his cufflinks.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And so I will wear them.
Yeah.
And to me, that's just a way of having my dad with me.
Yeah.
And honoring him and him being a part of my music ministry at the same time.
Now, before we go to this next slide, I want to express something to you. Some of you watching have a faith. You may be Buddhist, you may be Muslim, you may be Hindu or Christian, and some of you may be agnostic or atheistic. I want you to know that the research shows that faith is, some form of faith involvement is a part of almost every experience of loss. And most people view that in somehow a spiritual manner. We will view it through the eyes of Christianity. That's our background, that's our belief system. You're going to have to make an adjustment on what we say here and just see it from your viewpoint, your eyes. Our goal here is not to change you, not to direct you one direction or the other, but to help you make the adjustments and understanding that even the research says that the vast majority of our world's population, that's the United States and Canada and life, have some sort of belief system, believing in some sort of higher power. And so with that in mind, this is how we put this. So would you like to talk a little bit about this?
With loss of faith, many people are going to experience a temporary loss of faith, regardless of what level of faith that you have.
That's normal, and everyone goes through it.
It's perfectly normal. Some people may never waver once.
Yeah, and that's fine.
And I those are the people that I will try and get as close to as possible, in the hopes that they'll encourage me in my own faith experience. But some of the causes: overwhelming pain, loss of messages of love that God has sent through the person that we lost.
And now that message center is shut off, so we don't hear those messages anymore.
We don't hear those messages anymore. Misunderstanding God's character and His promises.
Some people have this concept that if I'm close to God, He'll never let me go through this. He's never promised that.
He's never promised. And really the 23rd Psalm, which is one of my favorites, He says, I will walk with you through.
Yeah, the valley of the
shadow. The valley of the shadow.
So we go through it.
We go through it. It didn't say I'm going to corner and you're not going to experience it.
No.
It just says I'm going to be with you through. And that's really what my faith stands on, is that hope.
And again, this is a Christian faith.
And the assurance of that, yes.
Jewish faith would view the same way. And your own faith tradition, I don't know of any faith, really solid faith, that says you don't have loss. We all understand it's a reality. So go ahead. I'm sorry I interrupted, but I'll do that again. You know me.
You might possibly do that.
Yeah, you know that.
That's all right. I'll step on yours. Misunderstanding God's character and promise, and then a belief that believers should not grieve.
Yeah.
And there's a whole other segment on just the things that you shouldn't say, but grief-related depression numbs every emotion but pain. It's like that Fred Flintstone thumb.
Yeah.
That is like great big
Watching
huge
the cartoon,
thing, and just thump, and that's all that you can, because that is where grief just overwhelms and takes over your entire body, every sense.
What we can say right now, though, is if you are a person of faith and your loss has caused you to feel distant from God, in most cases this is temporary. It's a normal part of the experience. And so don't obsess over that. Don't worry about it. Eventually, it may cause you to question your faith, and that's a healthy thing, actually. So ask questions about what I believe, why I believe, is it right to believe, am I believing the right things? All of the things are normal, and you will make that journey when the time comes. So don't obsess over that. So what to do?
Focus on the positive elements of your faith. Choose to believe in a loving God despite your current emotions or situations.
Yeah.
Do not insist on answers, but rather trust in a person. Realize that your current feelings are temporary, and assure yourself that your loss of faith is not a sign of spiritual weakness. And then ultimately develop a new relationship with what you lost.
Exactly. And again, we present it primarily from a Christian standpoint, but I've listened to Jewish authors do the same thing, Muslim authors do the same thing, right on down the line. And then people who are agnostic or atheistic will tell me, many of them have told me that they've had some sort of a spiritual dimension to this loss they don't quite understand, or maybe some of them do. This information is valuable for anyone, regardless of your faith tradition or regardless of your belief system. Understand that this can be a part of it. Some would just simply despair for life. There's no purpose, there's no meaning, and so they will withdraw. That's not a healthy thing to do, and it may be that you need to challenge your belief systems one way or the other. And that's for people all across the spectrum of belief, unbelief, doesn't matter. You need to be intellectually honest with yourself. Keep the loved one alive in your memory in a healthy way. Form a new identity without the other person's presence in your life. Provide yourself with an easy exit should you find it to be too much. Now, this is especially true when you engage in what I refer to as leaning into the pain. Make sure there's an easy way to get out. If you bit off more than what you can chew, your eyes are bigger than your stomach, so to speak, make sure you know how to get out. I did that once through my experience. Right. There was one thing I tried to do, and in the middle of it, I said, I can't do this. And I walked out. I left. And so that happened to me once, and for other people it may happen more than that. That's okay. That's all right. And if you're going to read religious material, it needs to be positive, grace-filled, short, light. Don't get into anything heavy. Don't get anything that trashes anybody else. Something positive that paints a picture that is alluring and attractive for you. That's what I would read, especially during all the phases of your loss. This is important.
And then just to add to that, and if someone gives you something to read and you're not quite ready for it yet, it's okay. Set it aside and thank them.
Understand they meant well.
They meant well.
That's okay.
Yeah. So what are some of the things that you can do? Pray short, praise-filled prayers. Focus on positive aspects of God's character. Develop a sense of gratitude. And then spend time with positive, encouraging, faith-filled people. I'm very blessed to have a group of women that every Saturday since COVID shut down the world, that we get together every Saturday morning at 6:30 a.m. here in Texas, and we just share our week, and we share what brings us joy and what hurts our heart, and we cry together and we pray together, and that has been part of one of the aspects of the healing for me, because there's always other things that are going to happen, and it's the stress that comes with the grief.
That's right. We're going to move on to section 3 right now, finding meaning. And I conducted an interview with David Kessler. Is that what we're doing now, I think?
It is.
What are we doing?
Yes, it is. We are going to, we're just going to keep transitioning right into it, which is finding meaning. And this, again, was an interview that Mike did with co-host Dr. Sharmini Long, who is also Canadian, I might add, from British Columbia. And this was an interview that was done with Nick Wojcik on Lifestyle Magazine.
That's right. And I think this one we're moving into the phase where we want to find the adjustment and find meaning. We talked to Nick about this. Watch this video.
Wojcik, a best-selling author, is here with us today, telling us about the lessons he's learned through his life. You have inspired millions of people. I think I saw someplace where you've reached like 600 million people or something of that nature.
On TV. By the grace of God, our nonprofit organization, Life Without Limbs, is a nonprofit venue where I can go out and talk about how my faith in God has changed my life from a life without limbs into a life without limits. And so we've been 3 million miles around the world, 3,000 stages, 15 presidents and prime ministers. And it's just been incredible to see governments say, can you actually talk about your faith on national TV?
That is
like,
incredible.
Cool.
Yeah, I'll be happy to do so.
It's been awesome.
You probably never could have imagined that at 10 years old, what God had in store for you.
I had no idea. In fact, it really is a beautiful story if I can share it real quick.
Please.
When I was in Southern California preaching in front of a local church here, there was a little boy in the crowd, no limbs. And I looked at him and I'm like, wow. I mean, he looked exactly like me.
Yeah.
And I hugged his mom and I hugged his dad and they were crying. And then I saw my mom hug his mom and my dad hug his dad.
Wow.
And they cried.
Yeah.
And that's when God really convicted me. When you don't get a miracle, you can still be a miracle for someone else.
Yeah.
And it was an incredible turning point for me when, believe it or not, the janitor at my high school, when I was 17, looked at me and he said, "You're going to be a speaker." And I looked at him and I said, "You're crazy." and I walked through the little doors of speaking here and there. And then when a girl came up to me and she cried on my shoulder, she said, "Thank you, thank you, thank you. No one's ever told me that they love me. No one's ever told me that I'm beautiful the way that I am." That's when I knew I was born to be a speaker. Yeah. And I said, God, if that's what you had in plan, I don't need arms and legs. I still have a pair of shoes in my closet just in case he gives me them.
Yeah.
For real. Because I've seen miracles, but I'm not waiting for them. I feel complete. I feel like he has a unique purpose and I'm loving it.
Your message is
that interview with Nick tells us that in spite of your tragedy, in spite of the pain of your life, whether it be like Nick being born without limbs or you or me going through a loss, it doesn't mean that life is over. It doesn't mean that we're done now. There can be a future, and that's what we want to help press toward. So let's take a look at the next slide here. We're talking about grieving. Intense pain pays tribute to the person we lost and that we love so deeply. Eventually, grief ceases to be a tribute, and it can. So healthy grief finds a new tribute, a new way to find tribute, and the new tribute to those we have loved is a life well lived. That means that we're going to move forward into tomorrow. Nick, whether he knows it or not, had to grieve the loss of limbs, never having been, had limbs, and noticed that he was different than anyone else. There was a grief experience for that for him, and he talks about it later in the interview. I don't know if we play that or not. At 12 years old, he tried to commit suicide because of his whole situation. But he found a new purpose for his living, because once he grieved the past, he recognized his value, that he could have something new. That's a part of what we do eventually. We move to the point where we invest our lives and we live our lives well, and that gives us meaning and value.
And so with everything, there needs to be goals. And so the goals for grief are really a revisit to what was presented in the earlier session. Goal number 4 is saying goodbye to the relationship that you once had with the person, but that can no longer exist. So you're withdrawing the emotional energy that was invested in the relationship, and you're going to reinvest it elsewhere.
Yeah.
So joy is really found by investing in God, in people, and in great causes.
When you think about the best times of your life, usually those are associated with a person you've loved or something you've accomplished, some great cause, something philanthropic. When you live your life with something bigger than yourself, you live a life of value and purpose. And so saying goodbye to the old relationship, the relationship it used to be, and withdrawing that emotional energy and reinvesting is a part of the re-identifying who we are, redefining. And I don't want to make this sound like that this happens right away, because we're skipping over 8, 10, 12 months worth of work, maybe longer for you, before you get to this point. But this is one of the final goals for our process of moving from the point of loss to a point of joy. And that means that we realize that life can be lived. So when you say goodbye, you're acknowledging that what you have lost is no longer going to share your life with you anymore. Whether it be a job, a place, a person, a dream, or even part of your body, you will always have the memory, but now you acknowledge that what you lost will, you will live without it for whatever it was that you lost. It is now no longer a part of your life. And so, since that was so significant to you and for the purpose for your living, eventually you have to find that new purpose. And it's the great things that bring the great joy. It's a cause. For some people, it's racial equality and the ending of racism. For other people, it will be feeding the hungry. For others, there are other things. It may be pets. It may be any number of things that you reinvest yourself in. For some people, it's going to be faith. For some people, it's going to be family members, existing relationships that you just reinvest in. But you must first let go of that which was in order to take that energy and reinvest and redefine yourself.
I had a lady share with me the letter that she had written to her breast.
Yeah.
And it was such a unique letter to have read, and such a gift for her to have trusted me with being able to read it. And it was written the day before she had the mastectomy. And it was her journey with her breast and her grief over the loss of that part of her. And it was very sacred that she was willing to express that even in the letter, but that was her way of saying goodbye to something that she knew was no longer going to be part of her life.
Right. And so that's what we're talking about now, is that one of the ways to say goodbye to this individual or that which is not a part of your life is by writing a letter. Right. And if you're going to write a letter to that, and again, this letter, I know who you're talking about, obviously, yes. And having read that letter, it was the most touching thing, because this was an important part of her life and identity as a feminine being, and now losing it was going to be a real trauma for her. When I lost my wife and you lost your dad, there was a need to eventually come to the point where we let go. We keep them in our mind and in our hearts, our memories, but we also have to have this new identity. So when you're going to write this letter, you have to be completely truthful. That means there may be some painful things that you write in there, as well as the healthy things.
However, my father was perfect.
Oh, is that right?
And so there was absolutely nothing negative about anything that I've written about him.
Be engaging in just a smidge of denial, you think?
I was a perfect child. He was a perfect child.
All right, you go with that. Yeah. But for most of us who live in the land of the living, that's not always the case. So write the letter, and there may be negative aspects of the relationship that you have to mention in the letter. Make sure you identify that unfinished business. This includes making amends for things you're sorry for either having said or done, or not having said or done. Saying I'm sorry is really important. Offering forgiveness, things that you need to forgive another for, whether real or imaginary. You might think, well, how can I do this since they're deceased? Do it anyway, because forgiveness at this point is for you. When you offer forgiveness to someone, it's not just for that other individual. It's also for you, because you release the guilt, the shame, the animosity. You release the tension and the resentment. And those are things that will kill you. All of them are destructive things. So when you give the forgiveness, it helps take away that animosity. And if you say they don't deserve the forgiveness, no one deserves forgiveness, or you wouldn't have to offer it. You can't deserve forgiveness. It's something you give in spite of the fact the recipient doesn't deserve it. You don't forgive. You don't deserve it, but you need it anyway. Expressing significant emotions, statements such as I miss you, I love you, thank you, I forgive you, those are a part of this letter. I encourage you in most cases to write it alone, so that no one else influences how you write it. You can share with someone and edit it later, but write it alone. Write the letter as though the person were going to receive it, and that it would be all right for them to receive it this way. Recall your last conversation and share this maybe. Read your letter to a significant person. The woman that you referenced read that letter to me, to her daughter, and to a variety of other people, and it was healthy for her. She also shared that with you. Yes. So read it to a significant person, say goodbye. I've also had people do something else with this letter that I've encouraged to write. they will, at times, it's healthy just to put a stamp on it and mail it. But you can't mail it to the deceased because they're not there to get it. So I've had them address the letter to the deceased in my care at my address. And then they will do that. I received the letter, and unless on the back it says you may open or read, I never open it. I've got a box with letters like that, upon my demise, they're going to be destroyed. That's what the instructions are, that they'll be gone. Because that's something is sacred. If it says you may open or read, I'll read it, because that's something that they trusted me with. But basically, that can be healthy. Other people will attach the letter to a helium-filled balloon and send it heavenward. A bottle in the ocean. They may create something. Religious people will create something they call a God box. And through a prayer of theirs, they give it to God. They lock it and say, it's no longer my issue. I've given this away. It is. And there are a variety of things you can do that would be helpful for you.
I was at a restoration retreat, and we all wrote down thing that was on our heart that we wanted to give to God, and we put it in a candle, and when we saw that it was just a very significant moment for us.
So something that is significant to you, that is in harmony with your belief system, in harmony with who you are, that's going to make you feel better.
So earlier in session 1, we alluded to the fact that David Kessler has actually added a 6th stage, which is finding meaning. And here we're going to hear a little bit more of an interview that David did on Lifestyle Magazine with Mike on stage number 6.
Here we go.
So what have you noticed about the literature that you created and your own experience? Is there a connection?
Well, I'll tell you, one of the things that obviously, the model that I work with is the one that I adapted Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's stages from.
And it's helped so many.
Dying to grief, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. And I had written a few pages for a proposal of a book that I thought there might be a 6th stage of grief. And I thought it might be meaning. David dies, cancel lectures, stop everything. And then in the months after, I run across that proposal. And I looked at it and I went, yeah, like that's going to help. Because the pain's just so devastating.
It is at first.
And I thought, well, let me just read it. And I began reading it and going, this actually is helpful. This really, and it began helping me. And I realized there is another stage, the stage of meaning. We can find meaning even after the most devastating losses.
Meaning helps you find life again.
It does, and it also becomes a cushion.
Yes.
And I wanted people to find tools to help them. The other thing that was really important to me is I remember a good friend of mine, probably 2 or 3 months after David had died, had a dog of 17 years that died. Another friend had one of their best friends die. And I remember comforting them, and they both said to me, how can you be comforting me after what you've been through? And I said, you know what? I cannot look at anyone else and go, your tears don't count.
Yes.
Yeah, that's it.
Everyone's tears count.
That's very true. Everyone's tears count. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, if a man has not discovered something that he will die for, he isn't fit to live.
That's an interesting quote there.
And then Jessamine West said, the source of one's joy is also often the source of one's sorrow.
Yeah, and joy comes primarily from those great investments that we make, be it in people, in faith, in great causes. Martin Luther King Jr., of course, was people and the cause of freedom. For all of us, there's something that's big in your life. And if there's not, then that's something that you need to consider investing in, because that's the part of the redefining who you are and finding that new purpose and that joy for your life, that reinvestment. For some of you, the reinvestment is going to be a remarriage, but that's not for everyone who's lost a spouse. Let's talk a little bit about widowers, because that's an area of not just expertise for me, but also personal experience. Most men of and here's what the research shows, most men of long-term successful marriages who lose a spouse to death remarry within 10 to 15 months. I've observed this for years, and I've always been mystified by why it happens. I've seen it happen over and over again, and the research shows that it's not just anecdotal with me observing. This is something that happens frequently. In fact, most men will remarry within that time frame. If men ever experience intimacy, this is the reason why all this happened, by the way, and I've figured this one out on my own.
Okay.
By the way, the average is 10 to 15 months. I lasted 16 months.
Well,
I want everybody to know
good
that.
for you.
Yeah, if most men ever experience intimacy, they do so with their spouse because men don't do intimacy well. While women may have several intimate relationships, men will rarely experience more than one if they have one at all. They may have good friends, but there's no genuine intimacy other than that's usually what a man will experience in a marriage. Most of the joy and the meaning of life comes to us through those intimate, meaningful relationships. And when my wife died, I realized that was true for me. We had traveled so much and been on the road so many days out of the year that we'd lost touch with a lot of friends. And so we joked that neither of us could afford to die because we'd leave the other person absolutely alone. And when she died, it was no longer a joke, it was my reality. I truly was alone. And I had a void, a vacuum in my life. And it wasn't just the void of a person, someone to hear the voice, it was the void of genuine intimacy. Someone to trust, someone who loved me, who I loved back, who we could be open about our life and share our life together. And so that's why it was important for me to reinvest that way. Not everyone does. I did, and I married the lovely lady that you see seated to my left, your right, I believe is how that would be. We had met, in fact, Gail and I met her at a camp meeting that we did up in Canada.
The Central Camp meeting.
That's right. And so, and then after her death, she sent me condolences, which reminded me she was there. And then sometime after I really felt like I was doing better, I contacted 2 or 3 people asking for a friend, and she was one of those, and that was a friendship that stuck. I wasn't looking to remarry, I just wanted someone to share a life with and talk to. And I figured she lived in Canada, I lived in Texas. That was distance enough to be safe. Well, so much for that. But
well, and the reality was I've been single for 26 years.
Yeah.
So I was not looking to
Right.
marry. I was doing ministry full time.
Yeah.
And
So when I began to realize that I could have an intimate relationship again with someone who shared values and goals and dreams, that was something that was very engaging for me. It was very impactful for me. You may do that. You may not do that. I know some women never remarry, and some men never remarry, and that's okay. That's all right for you. Got 2 dear friends who lost their husbands shortly after I lost my wife, and both of these women have remarried now. I've got a 3rd dear friend who I'm not sure she will remarry. It may her personality is different. You have to do what's right for you, and if you do remarry, you may find that that not everyone's going to be happy with you. It is not for everyone, but reinvestment is for everyone. Whether that's reinvesting in a new love relationship or in existing family members with great causes, faith, whatever else it may happen to be, reinvesting is what we're talking about here. Widows and widowers may make a decision, they may not make that decision. That's not the issue. You have to do what's right for you. Life investments give meaning to life. That's the key we want here. When you say goodbye and you withdraw that emotional energy, you have to put it someplace. You invest it in something that brings value to your life. A life without meaning, a life without purpose is not a life that's worth living. And so it is what Kessler is alluding to with his final stage for grieving, which is to find meaning once again. And that means that joy is a byproduct. People talk about finding joy again, and that's what we want you to do. But you also have to realize that joy is not something you search for. Joy is a byproduct of living for something bigger than yourself. It comes from a purpose-driven, meaningful life. It's not something you get because you do something fun. That's happiness, and it may be thrilling, but that is not the same as joy. And joy comes from living your life on purpose. At the end of our lives, one of the things we do when we lose someone is we remember the stories for the purpose of putting that life in perspective. Why did they live? What impact did they make? And one of the great fears I had was that people would forget my wife and how important she was. So when people share those stories, it reinforced why her life was valuable. But then I have to think about my own life. Is it valuable? Does it bring meaning and purpose for other people? Is it something worth living? And I had to recognize that that's where my joy came from, is in that meaning of life, living a life on purpose.
Well, you probably thought you were going to get to the end of this and you weren't going to have a quiz. Well, here's a self-quiz that we want you to take a look at. And again, you'll have this in your handout, so you don't have to feel that there's pressure for you to answer those questions right now. These are good questions to ask yourself when you have some time in the next few days. What areas of life before my loss should I retain? What areas of my life should change? What life investments gave meaning to my life before my loss? And what life investments can I make today? Whether it's your faith, in family, in friendships, people that you know, and again, purpose-driven, the great causes, the things that you will want to be a part of.
And don't let anyone dictate this to you. This is your decision, is your choice. And what you invest in at first may not be what you invest in long term.
Yes.
You may say, all right, that was nice, but that's not me long term. I'm going to withdraw that and find something else. That's fine. You have to do this at your pace, but I encourage you that finding meaning in your life is going to be key for you here.
Right.
So anyway.
Well, I want to introduce the next video. Mike and Lionel LaMountain, who's one of the co-hosts of Lifestyle Magazine, have interviewed a singer-songwriter, country singer-songwriter, Wade Hayes. And we're going to show you a couple of videos with Wade, his experience in grief. And we'll show you those.
And these are going to run back to back.
Yes.
So it'll be one interview and then another part of the interview. We're going to play both of those right now.
Story behind Live Your Life.
This is another intro. This whole, seems kind of made up, but my oncologist, whom I've mentioned several times, Dr. Jordan Berlin, I love the guy. But he told me, he came in, we were going over my blood work after I had been through cancer the second time.
Wow.
It came back.
Yeah.
And I had to go through the whole thing again, all of the chemotherapy, the surgery. And he said, after that was all finished, we were looking at blood work. And he said, Wade, I don't know if you realize or not, this is a big deal. You were stage 4, and now there's no evidence of the disease whatsoever. He said, you need to go live your life. And he was telling me 2 things. He was saying, you were stage 4. This could come back at any time. You need to live your life. He was also saying, you were stage 4. Now there's no cancer. This is a miracle. You need to go live your life.
Awesome.
And I tried to take his words to heart, and it hit me so hard I had to go home and write a song about it.
The meaning for your life, a purpose for your life. It's been said that most men lead lives of quiet desperation. That really described you in some sense before this experience.
It certainly did, and especially, when the hits stopped coming.
Yeah.
And you're scratching your head wondering what to do next. And I mean, of course I was still playing and working, but it wasn't like it was when everything was new and exciting. But it does give me a lot of joy to help somebody. And I've discovered that that's some of the happiest times in my life is when I am actually helping somebody. And I have prayed and hugged many people, or prayed with and hugged many people after shows.
Yeah.
And I've seen many people in the audience bawling when I sing the song Go Live Your Life, because they've been affected some way by the song.
Yeah.
And before we go on with the presentation.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about what is going to be available for not only the people that are viewing it right now, but that might actually be seeing it a little bit later on. This is going to be a 6-week small group seminar, and Mike is holding up, this is the workbook that goes with it.
This is hot off the presses, by the way. We've already field tested this, and now we've got it printed. This is a DVD book-based curriculum, and we are partnering with
Willowdale
the Will
Seventh-day
Adventist Church. Now, this is Lifestyle Magazine that's doing this
Yes.
partnering with a resource that I wrote along with a dear friend of mine who passed away while we were writing this, and Travis Tyree. But this is going to be offered in your area. In fact, I think the first seminar starts September 6th.
Well, there's a couple of things. So first of all, there's going to be 2 separate sessions, which will accommodate 25 people in each of those sessions.
Right.
And it's going to be on a first registrant, first served basis. It just seems like an odd way of saying it, but there is space for 25 people. Now, the cost of the registration is $15, and that basically is going to allow them to get, to allow the Willowdale Church to get the booklet to you, and then also it will give enough time for them to have, so there's going to be a 2-week delay from when this session finishes, and they'll start the small group, and there will be some on a Friday evening, and then some on a Saturday.
By the way, for that $15, every participant gets a copy of this.
Yes.
And so this is a book that follows the sessions. There are 6 weeks of sessions. There are places here to take notes, to write your story, and it's full color with also other tools in here to help you understand your emotions, what you're going through. You've been drinking through a fire hose today. We've thrown a lot of information at you.
Yes.
And so this gives you the time to actually put it into purpose and into place in your life and to have this Zoom conference.
But the session is, where you can register is up and it's live. So I want you to write this down, willowdalechurch.ca/grief. So that's willowdalechurch.ca/grief. The registration is now live, which means as soon as this session is finished, they will give you more information again of that address. But if you are able to and you want to make sure that you are included in one of those 2 group sessions, the first 2 to start with, then you want to go to willowdalechurch.ca/grief and register.
Some of the principles that we've mentioned here will be reiterated, but there's a whole lot of new information that you need in order to help you through this process, and that is covered in these 6 weeks of sessions. One hour per week on either a Friday or a Friday night or a Saturday afternoon. It's a partnership with us and them. This is a program with local leaders that will be leading this, who have been trained. They know what they're doing, and the material I think you're going to find to be absolutely golden. And so we encourage you to enlist for this, because one-shot seminar is not enough to help you fix what you're going through. But to take the time to thoughtfully go through this process, I strongly encourage you to sign up and get other people you know who are going to benefit from this material to sign up as well.
Now, it had been our intention to be with you.
Yes.
And as we all know, that with COVID-19 and facilities and businesses and organizations being unable to have gatherings, this is the reason that it has been done virtually. But that being said, you're either watching us on YouTube or you might be watching us on Facebook. We have technicians standing by that will be able to send your questions, if you do have any questions, to Mike with regards to something pertaining to grief or your particular experience or a question that you might have. You can write those questions right now in the chat on either YouTube or on Facebook, because we are coming into the home stretch, so to speak, and we want to make sure that we have the opportunity to answer your questions.
So send those questions in right now, and then of course also think about the grief sessions. And after our questions and everything else, there will be a video teaser to give you more information about the grief sessions.
Go away yet.
And so don't go away after we conclude. But right now, let's transition to the next section of this, and that is, some of you are watching this seminar, I think, because you want to help people who have grieved. And others of you are watching because you're grieving, but you realize that down the line, this hurts so badly that if you could help someone else get through it, you'd like to do that. Let's talk a little bit about what that is like and what can be done here.
This is an interview with David Kessler, and really he's just talking about how to help others grieve.
Take a look at this.
As you know, grief.com is my
Yes,
site.
yes.
There's a listing there of the best and worst things to say to people in grief. You know, some of the worst ones are, you can have another child. You know, isn't it good they died quick?
Yeah, yeah.
Some of the best ones are just like we've mentioned, I'm here with you. Here's a story of your loved one. You're in my thoughts, you're in my prayers. And to help people.
That's right.
Show up and help them.
I've got a book in my library entitled "Don't Ask for the Dead Man's Golf Clubs."
Correct, correct.
It goes right along with what you were just talking about, things not to say.
Again, if you want to help someone, you show up. I talk to young pastors who want to help people with grief, and the younger you are, the more you want to fix it. You know, counselors and pastors, and I tell them, show up and shut up. If you show up, they can't say you weren't there. If you shut up, you can't say anything incredibly stupid. But basically, it means normalize the experience of the person who's grieving. Ask the questions rather than give fixes, because your answers are going to seem trite or insensitive. And it may be an answer that they're not ready for anyway. You don't know. You can't read their mind. So it's better just to allow them to talk and to share what's going on. And as you go through your loss, you'll know that there are some things that are helpful for you and others that are not. Learn from that. And also learn that other people are different. Not everyone responds well to the things I responded to, and others I don't respond well to the things they respond to. So just know that we're all different and we need to cut each other some slack here. But being present is the key. Being present. There are a couple of videos I want to share with you before we go to the question and answer section. We're going to start first of all with Wade Hayes, I believe it is, again, as he talks again about meeting the purpose for his life and moving through finding a new direction after his battle with cancer. Take a look at this.
One day I was speaking with my oncologist, Dr. Berlin, and he introduced me to a man who had been through something very similar diagnosis, and was still alive after 9 years.
Wow.
And this was when I was in the thick of it. And I met that man and saw that it could be done. This guy made it. There is hope. And that was the word.
Yeah.
You know, I was chosen to survive to maybe give somebody else hope,
Give 'em
like
hope.
that gentleman did for me that day.
There's hope for you. And that's something you can share with other people as well. This hurts so badly. And if you're in the throes of it right now, you're in the midst of it, you wonder if this pain will ever end. The truth is that the pain will not be like it is now forever. There will be a change. And eventually it will subside. There will still be periods when you grieve, and you grieve intensely, and you feel the pain all over again. But it will not be as ever present, and not always as fierce as it seems to be right now. There will be a time when you can live and you can breathe again. So there's hope. There's hope for you. And I'd like to play one more video excerpt. This is again from the interview I did with Nick Wojcik. As he talks about hope and a future and purpose for his life. And although his is over a guy that had no arms and legs, I think it's very applicable to our situation as people who are taking the journey of grief. Take a look.
I just want to be real with you to tell you I love you. No matter what you're going through, you are here for a reason. Don't give up, because you don't know what broken pieces you have could be transformed into something very beautiful. The smile you see is real. This hope you see in my eyes and my heart is real. And I just want you to know hope is there to be found. You are loved. God loves you. Never give up. And I hope that my story has helped you to know that if a guy without arms and legs can dream big, then so can you.
Awesome. Have a website or two?
Definitely go.
I love the interview with Nick because he is so hope-filled. And his message is good for all of us. I found courage myself in listening to that message, that there's hope for me.
You see the joy.
Yeah, you can see the
You
joy in
really
his
see the
face.
joy.
And by the way, off camera, he's as engaging and genuine as he is on camera. There's no difference. There's no two-face about that guy. He is just a wonderful, loving human being who has decided that in spite of his pain, in spite of his loss, he's going to live his life to his fullest. Mm-hmm. And so I would encourage you to do the same. Don't rush yourself to that point. Take your time to move through this at a time that's appropriate for you. Mm-hmm. It may be months, it may even be a couple of years before you feel like you can breathe again. But eventually, you can re-engage. There's hope for you. Joy can be your ally again, and you can find a new purpose and a new direction for your life. And so I encourage you to do that. Before we take the Q&A, one more mention, and that is don't forget to register for the grief sessions. You're going to enjoy this material. It's going to be helpful. It's going to be a blessing to you. All right.
I just want a personal appeal on my part. The Willowdale Seventh-day Adventist Church was my home church. I grew up in that church. Mm-hmm. And I know that just within the last 18 months, they have experienced loss after loss.
Everybody else.
It's been cumulative. Yeah. It has been, my dad's best friend, Stu Kistrick, passed away in February of 2019. Yeah. Dad passed away in September. Eileen Dahl, a wonderful woman who has been doing a lot of ministry with grief, mm-hmm. actually lost her battle to cancer. And just this year alone, Willowdale Church has, month after month, had to withstand. Brent Chin lost both his mom and sister to COVID. Richard Kruger, Linda Toot, Gladys Struess, Martha Philipchuk. These are people I've known my entire life.
I mentioned a couple that lost a baby.
As well as the Matthew family who lost their mom. And so this is going to be a place where you're going to be able to connect with people who are walking that grief journey and experiencing it.
The truth is, the thing about Kessler that made him so engaging is not just that he's an expert, but that he's walking the same journey. His son died. Mm-hmm. And so he's written a new book on the grief experience with his son. We're just fellow journeyers. Mm-hmm. You're on a journey, and it's not an easy road. And we created these materials in order to help you along that journey. No one's getting rich off this. The $15 for your book, that's cost. And so basically, mm-hmm. this is a service offered to you by a local congregation, Lifestyle Magazine. That's why I created the materials.
I care about you.
Because you're hurting, we're hurting, right. But we found that there's hope. And that's what we want to share with you. So now, what are our questions and answers?
Well, we do have a question.
You got the questions, I got the answers.
We have from one of our wonderful technicians that's handling the questions coming in. What can we answer when someone asks, where is God amidst a tragedy like the death of a spouse?
First, I think it's important to recognize that the answer is not as important as the journey is. And that question is a normal question. A lot of people ask it. And there may be a variety of answers that are of value to that particular question. So when that's asked of me, instead of providing an answer, because sometimes it's more important to ask the question and take the journey than it is to have an immediate answer, I'd say, there's no easy answers to that, and there are answers. I think that you need to come to your own answer, and that's a journey I'll take with you if you want. We can talk about that. We can ask the questions. I can share with you eventually what my answers were as I share my story with you, but I'm not going to try to quick fix this for you because no one can do that for me either. And so for me, it's not so important that I have the great answer, because I think answers sometimes are overrated. But what is underrated and undervalued is the journey it takes to get to the answer. And that the answers may vary somewhat from person to person because of your own faith tradition, your background, your focus, your personality, your life experiences, the circumstances of the death. Mm-hmm. That's okay. It's going to vary. But the key is eventually you can come to a point of peace. And for me, if I encourage people to do anything, it's just to entertain the notion that someplace in this, the reality is that God is good and God loves you. If you can entertain that notion and hold that out as a hope, then we can take this journey together, and it's going to be an easier journey to take. Mm-hmm. We don't understand right now, but let's take that journey one step at a time. And let's not try to rush to a conclusion, mm-hmm. because the journey is more important than the answer in the long run.
Well, even for myself, one of the things that was beneficial was good friends that didn't have to give me the solutions. They just sat with me.
Yeah.
And even though it was virtual,
Yeah.
but it was the time that they invested in sitting, and even if all I did was cry, and all they did was cry, that in itself was helpful in sharing that journey.
You know, a lot of people have tried to give me answers, even when I didn't share a question with them. They wanted to fix me, and so they gave me some trite saying that they thought was helpful to explain where God was or why this happened. And I've never benefited from any of those answers, quite frankly. What I have benefited from are people who just shook their head and were there.
Yes.
People who cried with me. People who put an arm around me. Those are the things that I've benefited from. And so even if I ask the question, I realize that it's more of a rhetorical question at that point. I may earnestly think I need the answer, but what I need more than the answer right now is a friend who'll take a journey with me. And so that's what I encourage you to understand as well.
And we're going to go into another question, and just remind you though that the site is available, willadalechurch.ca/grief, and it is available for registration. We have a question here that says, how do you reconcile the feeling that you want to see a silver lining, a blessing, that you want to see past? You want to see you move past the loss of a spouse, but you feel guilty as if you move on, that you've betrayed that person.
Absolutely. And by the way, it's hardly been a spouse who's lost a spouse who hasn't felt that. I felt it. There are times when in my process, all of a sudden, I laughed at a joke, and I felt guilty for laughing. I enjoyed an experience, and I felt guilty for enjoying the experience. And then to think about moving on, I felt guilty about thinking about moving on. Everyone just about goes through this. And so you don't have to reconcile it, just recognize that it's normal. But eventually, we have to come to the realization that healthy people who die would want us to live the life that we have and to live it to its fullest. And for some of us, that means moving on and reinvesting. So, for all of us, eventually it means reinvesting. Doesn't mean we necessarily reinvest in remarriage. But we move on with our life because we've got to pay a new tribute to them. Life was good because of them. And now I'm going to find a new way to live life that is good in honor of them. That's the transition we make in our thinking, at least that I made in my thinking. So if you're going through this, you're normal. It's okay. Everyone goes through it. I've gone through it. I don't know of anyone who's lost a spouse who has not had those same thoughts. So it's okay. I remember a conversation, though, I had with my spouse. She asked me, do you think you'll remarry? Because we knew she was going to die. Do you think you'll remarry? I said, I don't know. I have no idea. I don't think so. She looked at me, she said, no, you'll remarry. I said, what? No, she said, you'll remarry. You need to be married. And in essence, she gave me permission to move on eventually. And she knew that I would. And so I think that's important, that healthy people say, all right, I'm not there to have this life with you. I want you to have life. I want you to move on. And so eventually we can make that shift in our thinking. But if you're going there, don't feel guilty about the thoughts and about the apparent incongruence between those things. You have a new tribute to pay to your spouse, and that is a life well lived.
All right, I want to help my friend going through the loss of someone very dear, but I'm afraid of saying the wrong things. Yeah. Can you talk a little more about the big no-no?
Again, the big no is just to try to fix it. Instead, take the journey and you go to your friend and say, listen, I don't know what to say. I don't want to mess things up for you, but I also want to help you. And so the only thing I can do right now is to be here. And maybe that means doing something physical for you. You want me to come over and cook a meal? You want me to clean the house for you, or take your kids for a while so you can have some alone time? Take the dog for a walk. Or maybe we can go out as girls and do something together. Maybe you just need someone to talk to. If you want to tell the stories, I'm not going to interrupt you or tell you you're right or you're wrong. I'm not going to tell you shouldn't feel some way or you should feel another way, because I don't know. But what I do know is I'm your friend, and I'm going to listen to you without judging you, and I'll hold the Kleenex, and both of us will share them. That's the thing to do. I think that's more helpful than anything else, because giving answers is overrated and can actually do more harm than good. And if someone presses you for an answer, you say, here's all I can think of, and here's what I've experienced. That's all you can do. You're not the final authority. You are the authority on your experience, and you can share that.
So just in closing, just as a reminder, the grief sessions registration is available at willowdalechurch.ca/grief. The grief sessions is finding peace and healing as you're facing the loss. And this is really the purpose behind why the grief sessions were created by you and Travis, to be able to help people in the different experiences of grief as they're going.
I think you're going to benefit from this resource, and so I just urge you, take it seriously, lean into the pain, go ahead and sign up for the group, sign others up, get them to sign up as well, and this will be something you'll keep forever, and it'll be something you refer back to.
So we'll encourage you to connect with the Willowdale Church and register for the small group session. We hope that the little bit of information that Mike has been able to share with you today has been a benefit to you, and that it will be something that will encourage you in your journey as you continue.
My understanding is that we're going to leave you now, so we're going to be done, but there's also a video that's going to explain a little bit more about the grief sessions coming up. So please stay tuned to watch that. I hope that this has been of value to you. That's why we've done it. And if the small group curriculum, I think you're also going to find that to be of value. So watch the video. But until then, we're going to have to say goodbye virtually until we can finally get to Canada. This girl's going to get me there as soon as the border opens. I guarantee you that. And so we want to see you then. But until then, you take care of yourself. We'll see you later. And watch the video now.
It doesn't have to be that way. There is light at the end of the tunnel. Choose how your loss and your struggles define you. It's time to get more from the Grief to Joy seminar. Starting from August 7, we will hold group meetings to explore what Mike Tucker presented during his live stream. Entitled The Grief Sessions, this program will offer 6 workshops focused on dealing with loss and finding peace. Whether you recently faced a tragedy or are helping someone dealing with a life storm, these personal sessions will equip you as you lift yourself and others up. Ida Smith will be one of the facilitators. She is a certified counselor and psychotherapist, and a great resource thanks to her wealth of experience. Jake Ivanovich will be the other facilitator. He currently works with the Police Victim Services in the Simcoe District and assists firefighters, nurses, and paramedics after traumatic events. To register for the grief sessions, go on willowdalechurch.ca/grief.